Greetings sailors, welcome to the first of my Soviet cruiser preview videos, and I realise I'm maybe a little behind the curve with these, but it's been a rather busy week in terms of video making. And of course, you can just stick out the good replays as you have them, but I prefer to do things in a slightly more kind of strung together way. So I've waited until I've got good games for all the cruisers, basically. I was slightly hampered by the fact that Wargaming kind of mucked it up a bit, and I have touched on this before, but very briefly, basically they credited these preview ships to our regular accounts rather than giving us separate like preview accounts, press accounts. Now that meant initially that unless you had a lot of free XP and a lot of credits, you basically couldn't afford to unlock all the upgrades for the ship. And although they did rectify that fairly quickly by basically making the upgrades cost 1 XP and 1 credit each, however that still meant the equipment was full price basically, and because this was our regular account, unless you happen to have a lot of credits, you were a bit stuffed. So I played most of these ships without any equipment, so no damage control, no gun control, no anything basically, because I didn't have the spare bits of equipment. There are, I think on the Moskva I stole a couple of bits from other stips, but there were a couple of slots I had to leave empty just because I didn't have the requisite bits from other ships, because I don't have a lot of high tier ships. I've only got 1 tier 9 and 3 tier 8s, so yeah, it was just a matter of not having a lot of credits. In fact, I think Earl Grey spent something like 27 million credits all told, just outfitting the entire line. And that was... Wargaming basically said, we're not going to just give you the credits for putting the equipment on these. So yeah, hopefully next time they do something like this, it is a separate account, because the whole thing's just been a bit frustrating. But anyway, despite not really possibly perhaps getting the full experience of these, as a whole, my initial impressions of the line are fairly good. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the particulars for each ship. This video is going to cover tiers 2, 3 and 4. I've done the usual thing of sticking a bunch of numbers into a spreadsheet to compare the ships. So we'll start off with this, the tier 2, the Novik. Now, this actually has the smallest caliber guns of a tier 2 cruiser. It's got 120mm guns. The Chester is the next smallest with 127mm, and then the Diana and the Chikuma both have 152mm. Now it's got a good rate of fire, it's got a 5-second reload, so it's actually got the best reload, I think, at this tier. And because these are 120mm guns, they are affected by basic firing training and advanced firing training. And of course you also get the full benefit of expert marksman, so you get that extra turret turn time as well. So you can get the rate of fire to be a little bit better. Base turret turn time is about 22 seconds, which is on par with the Chester. You can get that down to 18 seconds, which is rather nice. Range wise, it's a little behind everyone else actually. It's ahead of the Chester, but behind both the Diana even, and the Chikuma. 10.1 kilometers, but you can get that to 11.1 with advanced firing training. But you're probably not going to have that skill on a tier 2 captain. Now you do actually have some anti-aircraft, some rather comically ineffective anti-aircraft. It's 1 kilometer range and it consists of like 3 machine guns or something. It's there, but that's not necessarily true for all the tier 2s. In fact, it's kind of unusual to find anti-aircraft on some of these lower tiers. But yeah, it's not very effective, and you're not really going to meet planes when you're in a tier 2 anyway, so it doesn't really pertain. Damage wise, even though these are smaller guns than the Chester gets, they're almost as effective. They are only slightly behind the Chester's shell damage, not anywhere really close to what the Diana and the Chikuma can do, because those are 152mm guns, but still 2000 AP Citadel damage and 1700 HE Citadel damage. Interestingly, double the fire chance, 8% fire chance per shell as opposed to 4% on the Chester, so the Chester kind of gets shafted there, and that actually puts it as the same as the Diana's 152mm. So I mean, it's a low tier, it's really an HE spammer. I did try, I think, with all of these low tier ships at times firing AP shells, but I had the most success with HE, so yeah, I mean, that's kind of true for most of the low tier ships anyway, the low tier cruisers especially. You're going to be using HE more often than not. And I found even against the perfectly presented sides of enemy cruisers, the AP wasn't doing a lot, so even then I was firing HE. Speed-wise, it's, again, fairly average, 25 knots, which puts it just behind the Chikuma and just ahead of the Chester. The turn radius is not fantastic, but still 500 meters turn radius is alright. Rudder shift time is actually pretty decent at 4 seconds, which isn't always true in the later tiers. And in terms of its surface detection, well, not that that really, again, matters at lower tiers, but just under 10 kilometers, so it's, all in all, it's a fairly average tier 2 HE spamming cruiser. It's got a fairly nice spread of guns. It's not particularly well armoured, as you can see from the bit of footage I've got going there. The arc's okay. The range, it's funny, the range of these lower tiers is not really anything special. It's not till you get to kind of tier 5 and above that they start to pick up some extra gun range. And that kind of is one of the flavours of the sort of mid to higher tiers, is they have got very good gun ranges. But unlike the German cruisers, they don't have the AP shells in the same way, and that's because they're smaller caliber guns generally. You don't really get the big guns until tier 10. I mean, the tier 5 and the tier 9 actually share the same caliber, but they do play very, very differently. So this was me trying out some AP shells against the side of this AFK. What is that? That's a Chester, I think. I can't actually see on the preview screen. Yeah, so it wasn't doing a lot, as you can see. You'll actually see on the end score screens that for the number of AP shells fired, the damage wasn't particularly significant. So HE all the way, and I think that's not really unusual for a low tier. There's not a huge amount to say about it, really. It's a low tier, not particularly slow HE spammer. It's faster than I mean, maybe it bears more direct comparison with Diana, because of course that already exists in the game. Although I don't think it's one you can actually buy, unless I'm wrong. No, I think the Diana's like a gift ship. I think that's how I got mine, as a gift code thing. But yeah, it's definitely faster than the Diana. It doesn't quite have the spread of guns or the firepower of the Diana, but it's the fact that it gets the same fire chance, even though it's got smaller guns than the Chester. I don't know, I think that kind of makes up for the smaller caliber of guns in comparison to its compatriots, and it kind of makes the Chester feel rather sad by comparison. But I don't think anybody really sticks around with the Chester, do they? They just go through to the St. Louis and then they play that over and over again. And well, we'll come to tier 3 in the next replay, obviously, because that's going to be the next one after this. So this game itself was well, a slow tier game. I just kind of sailed forwards, hoped my allies were better than the enemy team, and just tried to do what I could. And as it turned out, got a decent number of hits. Actually managed to kill some stuff, which isn't always the case in the low tiers. And well, we're almost done with this. I mean, it's just this last Storroger boy, and I maybe will even get the kill if I'm lucky. And I think his engine's out at this point, so I'm just hammering him over and over and over. And you can see the rate of fire there. And there we go. So yeah, not the top score, but still decent. And considering it was a tier 3 game, all the top tiers were actually, all the top scoring people were the bottom tiered people, the Umakazi, the Novik, and the Chikuma. So it was kind of amusing in its own way. Damage wise, 31 AP shell hits for less than 9,000 damage, and just under double the number of hits with HE shells for well over twice the damage. In fact, that's nearly 3 times the damage, or getting over 3 times the damage. So yeah, HE all the way, absolutely. Next up is the tier 3, the Bogatyr, which I'm probably saying entirely wrong. And this one's actually kind of interesting because you've got 152mm guns as your stock guns, but you've got the option of upgrading to 130mm guns. And you might be thinking, well, surely that's a downgrade. Well, yes and no. The 152mm do more damage, and I think they've actually got a slightly better rate of fire. However, of course, with the 130mm guns, you can use, again, advanced firing training, and you can actually end up with a really very good range for your tier 3 guns. You can actually go from the base range of 11.4 kilometers to 12.5, which puts it significantly ahead of the Aurora with 11.2. The Tenryu has got 11, and the St. Louis has 10.4. So you can outrange quite a lot. In fact, I think you might even be able to outrange the tier 3 battleships almost. I'd have to double check that, but they've got pretty terrible ranges as well. Hit points wise, it's quite close to the Aurora, 23,000, so it's middle of the pack, really. Although the St. Louis is, I mean, the main comparison, I suppose, at this tier is the St. Louis. The St. Louis has nearly 30,000 hit points at tier 3. It's also got a lot of guns, but this has a lot of guns as well. And actually, this has got, I think, slightly more guns than the St. Louis, which has got 14 single mount guns. This has got 12 single mounts, and then it's got 2 turrets, basically, fore and aft. So you've actually, and each of those turrets carries 2 guns. So you've actually got more guns. Now that's the same for both the 130mm and the 152mm guns, although the arrangement is slightly different actually. With the 152mm, it's some of them are casement mounted, so you've got 4 in the hull, and then you've got 8 sort of single mounts, and then you've got those turrets. Now, like I said, the rate of fire is actually slightly better with the 152mm. They reload very slightly quicker, but you can use basic firing training with the 130mm to get that to exactly the same rate of fire, so you reload in just about 9 seconds. Turret turn time is, it's on the low side. It's the same as the Aurora. It's 36 seconds, but again, you get the full benefit of the expert marksman with the 130mm guns, so you can get that down to about 26 seconds, which is still not quite as good as the Tenryu or St. Louis, but it's, you know, it's respectable. Range I've covered. In terms of secondary armament, it actually doesn't have any. I mean, the St. Louis is kind of unusual in that it's got almost as many, in fact, more secondary guns than primary guns. It's got a lot of those 76mm. No anti-aircraft on this either at all. Which is not unusual for tier 3. And in terms of the shell damage, again, the 152mm are really very average, 2700 AP with, let's see, 2100 HE citadel damage and 8% fire chance, so that's bang on the average. That's exactly the same as the Aurora. The Tenryu gets exactly the same, even though those are 140mm guns, if I've noted down the figures correctly. The St. Louis gets slightly more, but slightly less fire chance. The 130mm, interestingly, actually get slightly more fire chance than the 152mm. They have a 9% fire chance to the 8% of those 152mm that come out. This replay, by the way, I can't remember which guns I was using. I honestly can't remember. I mean, the captain definitely had the BFT skill. Don't think they had AFT. The nature of these ships is they're not regular ships. They don't, when we get them to preview like this, they don't earn XP, they don't earn credits. And that was one of the issues with them not giving us any credits and them just being on our regular account. Even just playing them, because you weren't making any profit, I was bleeding credits quite heavily. I went through about 600,000 or 700,000 credits before they actually implemented, again, another kind of a fix where they gave us at least, like, I was like 50k credits a game, which, you know, covers the cost of the consumables, basically. Anyway, this doesn't get torpedoes, and the reason I mentioned torpedoes is this is the first tier where cruisers do get torpedoes. The Tenryu ends up with 7km torp, but some of these Russian cruisers do, but you have to wait before you can get your hands on torps. But like the Russian destroyers, they're not particularly long-range torpedoes, so it doesn't really pertain to this tier, obviously, but if you're thinking they're going to be more like the Soviets, not the Russians, wow, more like the Japanese, good grief, they're really not. Now, speed-wise, it's actually exactly the same as the St. Louis, this thing, 24 knots, exactly the same. Turn radius, 450 meters, but a slightly worse rudder shift time. And I think this is the tier where the rudder shifts start to get a little worse. I mean, generally speaking, these are not particularly maneuverable ships, and you don't kind of get that flavour at the low tiers, because the low tier cruisers are all actually fairly similar, because they're all from the same era, essentially. But once you get to the higher tiers, you do start to feel that slight kind of unwieldiness. And it's probably more like the... you can't throw them around the water very well. And that is especially true at the tier 10. Obviously, there's going to be a separate video on the tier 10, but I'll tell you right now, it basically handles like a battleship. It's big. It's almost as long as the Yamato. But some of the others are fairly large for their tiers as well, considering they're reasonably lightly armoured cruisers. I don't think there's much else left to say about this. I mean, surface detection, again, is fairly average. You don't have AA, you don't have any... I think I mentioned secondary guns. So, yeah, all in all, it's fine. I mean, if you've got an AFT captain that you're desperate to go and seal club with at tier 3, this might even be a better ship for that than the St. Louis, just because you can get that extra range with the 130mm guns. So they are really an upgrade. You might look at it initially, and I did. I thought, right, you're actually dropping caliber, and they're less damaging shells, and you get a low rate of fire. Why would you want these? Because of captain skills, essentially. And if you've got the captain, having that extra kind of 1 to 2 kilometer range over everybody else, that's going to make a big difference at the lower tiers. But if you, on the other hand, get into a tier 4 game and there's tier 4 carriers, well, that's not going to maybe matter so much. But still, yeah, it's nice to have that extra range. So this actually ended up being a really close game, as you can see. There's myself and a destroyer left versus, what is that, a Dresden, a South Carolina, and an enemy destroyer, a Bogatyr. So I was, I mean, I'd done a decent amount of damage, as you can see from the damage counter. 30k at this kind of tier is not completely insubstantial. And as you can see, even against the Dresden, just mostly sticking with the HE shells, although I obviously used a volley of AP here. I will say, this, I can't remember if the tier 2 felt like it particularly, but this felt like it loses guns to enemies fairly easily. Like, the gun shields are clearly not very substantial, so getting hit by HE shells, you will lose guns, and I had already lost 1 in this game, but still, losing 1 gun's not the worst thing in the world. But there were games where I lost multiple guns, and maybe that happens all the time in the St. Louis, and I just don't seal club enough in the St. Louis. In fact, I don't even think I've got a St. Louis anymore, to be honest. I actually got rid of that. I think I kept the Tenryu at tier 3. And it's interesting, the Tenryu's actually the kind of the one that sticks out like a sore thumb at tier 3. It's not like the other tier 3 cruisers at all. Anyway, it's now just myself against the Bogatyr in the South Carolina. And I'm actually more concerned about the Bogatyr because, of course, he's got torpedoes and he's at relatively close range. The South Carolina could hurt if he hits me. But this is towards the edge of his range, so I fancy my chances against the South Carolina. And I kind of fancy my chances against the Bogatyr as well, because the chances are this is a newer player. But they were not playing badly, even so. They really weren't. So I've managed to set him on fire. I'm on fire myself, but I've just put that out, so that's fine. He's down to very low health now. In fact, he might even be burning out. I'm not actually sure. And we can see his health actually is just ticking down. So yeah, he's going to burn out, I think. Although, I'm going to keep hammering away anyway. And that's 5 kills, so that was actually a Kraken Unleashed medal. So now it's just me and the South Carolina. And, well, I'm just going to spam him with HE shells. Have I mentioned they're HE spammers? They really are. So as long as I don't get too close and don't make it too easy for him, I'm probably going to fairly easily walk away with this and hopefully not take any horrible citadels. Although it looks like he's firing HE shells, so that's probably not going to happen. Fire is probably more of a risk than actually getting penned. So I'm just hammering them over and over again. And actually, I picked up a Confederate there as well, so that's nice. That's actually 3 awards for this battle. Kraken Unleashed is a bit... Yeah, getting 5 kills. I don't have many of those since that was introduced, and well, yeah, there we go. There goes my steering again, but it doesn't matter. It's nice to get it, even, and there's a high caliber, even if it's on a ship like this where it is kind of a bit seal clubbing, but it's seal clubbing in the name of science. I'm testing these ships out. So really, yeah, I think even though on paper, I didn't play that many battles in it, but even though on paper it looks inferior to the St. Louis, I think this is a very strong contender and I think it stands up very well to the St. Louis. The main advantage that the St. Louis has when it's top tier is those extra hit points. Nearly 30,000 hit points on the top hull is pretty substantial when everybody else is sitting at around 20,000 or just over 20,000. In fact, the Chikuma gets less than 20,000. Not the Chikuma, the Tenryu. So, burning again, and I had some guns incapacitated, but I haven't actually permanently lost anymore. I've got multiple criticals, but yeah, as long as I don't burn out, as long as I don't get multiple fires set, I mean, I'm just trying to hammer him over and over and set him on fire again. And as you can see, even though these are relatively small shells, and these are actually the smallest caliber shells. If it is the 130mm guns, these are the smallest caliber shells at tier 3. And the Chikuma kind of loses out, actually, because AFT and BFT apply to 139mm and under. Both the Chikuma and the Tenryu at tier 4. No, wow, why do I keep saying Chikuma? It's the Tenryu is the tier 3. And the Kuma's the tier 4. They both have 140mm guns, so they just lose out, but the Bogatyr does not. So that was actually a really good game, as it turned out. A bit of a carry, you might even almost say. 6 kills, half the enemy team. Yeah, it's a powerful little ship. Absolutely. It might even become a SEAL Clubber's delight. Who knows? We shall see. But as you can see from that score, again, the majority of the damage is from the HE shells. Although proportionally, I think I did better with the AP that time. But it really was just hitting them over and over with the HE and keeping that ring of guns, because you've got even more guns than the tier 2. Just keeping them firing over and over, and that in the end was enough. Finally, at least for this video, we come to the tier 4, the Svetlana, and hopefully I'm saying that right as well. That one seems much more straightforward, but sometimes it's the seemingly straightforward ones that catch you out. This, as you can see, was a top tier game, and well, again, it's going to be a win, and again, as you can already see, it's just ringed with guns. Now, this one, unlike the Bogatyr, it doesn't have a choice. It's either 130mm guns or more 130mm guns. You do get a gun upgrade, if I remember correctly. Anyway, you get 15 single mounts, and that actually means you're kind of similar to your tier 3 predecessor. And that gives you actually a lot more firepower to work with than both the Kuma and the Phoenix, which... It's always interesting going from the tier 3 to the tier 4 in both lines. Well, maybe not so much on the Japanese. I think from tier 3 to tier 4 on the Japanese is more kind of consistent. But you go from the St. Louis to the Phoenix and it's a rather different experience. This is sort of more of the same. Hit points wise, pretty much dead on average. They're all around 24,000 hit points, so nothing special there. It's got 15 of these 130mm guns. The Kuma's got 740mm guns, so again just misses out on the AFT and BFT bonuses. And the Phoenix has got a rather nice spread of 152mm, and I actually quite like the Phoenix. It's one I actually kept. This does have, I think, the worst rate of fire, but you've got such a lot of guns that it doesn't matter so much. And you can improve that with BFT, so you can make that better, definitely. Turret turn time, again, the worst of all three, but with the benefit of Expert Marksman, you can get it down to about 20 seconds flat. Otherwise, it's just over 25 seconds. And the range, well, it's actually behind its compatriots this time. Its base range is 11.3, and that actually places it 100 meters worse off than the Bogatyr, which had 11.4 kilometers. But with AFT, you can get that to 12.4. But AFT is a rather advanced skill for a tier 4 captain, so again, unless you're really prioritizing it or you're retraining a captain from somewhere else, you're probably unlikely to have that available. So you kind of, I think that's the penalty they've given you for having more firepower in terms of just having more guns, is you actually have slightly worse range, but you can then buff that out to be at least the same as your compatriots. The Phoenix is actually by far the best at nearly 14 kilometers, so that definitely wins out, and that's one of the reasons why I like it. But the Kuma's not bad either. Now, tier 4 is definitely the tier where you start to see more aircraft around, a lot more aircraft, because that's where the aircraft carriers start. But in keeping with its compatriots, doesn't have a lot of AA. The Phoenix is the clear winner in that regard, but This, I mean, it's a lot more similar to the Kuma. It's not really going to save you if torpedo bombers come for you. You might shoot down the old plane here or there, but on the whole, your best bet is just dodging around things, basically. Now, as these are smaller shells, they do the least damage, but there's still a bump in damage from the previous tier with the 130 mils, even though they're the same caliber of guns. So they're only a little behind the Kuma's 140 mil guns. It's 2500 on a Citadel versus 2700 for the Kuma. And on HE there's more of a disparity. It's 1900 versus 2400. The Phoenix has by far the best AP, but actually the Kuma's got the better HE, which is interesting. But HE Citadels are, like, at this tier you're talking carriers. HE Citadels are not really a thing. Fire chance, however, is more of a thing. And actually this time it's the worst off of the three. It keeps that 9% that it had at tier 3. The Kuma has 10% and the Phoenix is again the winner with 12%. So although this, I don't know, it's got some advantages to it, but whereas the tier 3 with this kind of recipe was a very strong recipe, at tier 4, although it still feels pretty good, I think the Phoenix is like, the Phoenix is my favourite of the three. I like the Kuma as well. I really like the Kuma, but it's, I don't know, this kind of fits somewhere in between, and it almost feels like it's a hangover from the previous tier. Now, this is the first one of the Soviet cruisers that actually does get torpedoes. Now, the smallest torpedoes at tier 4, they are 450 mil torpedoes versus the 533. Whatever that is in inches, I've got no idea. They do by far the least damage. They have the worst range, although only just behind the Phoenix. They're 5 kilometers versus 5.5. Just over 7,000 damage. The Kuma has 7 kilometer torps that do nearly 11,000, and the Phoenix has got 5.5 kilometer torps that do nearly 12,000. So the torpedoes are kind of, they're not great. They're actually also the slowest at 52 knots, and that's pretty slow. So it's nice that they're there, but you're probably not going to get to use them much. It's like if you've managed to ambush a battleship or something at really close range, because most of the things are going to be able to avoid them, and it's not really, like, this isn't like the Kuma where the torpedoes are almost equal as your kind of main armament to your guns. This one really is all about the guns. It's kind of like the destroyers, where the torpedoes almost feel like an afterthought. Occasionally useful, but if you're trying to use them as your main armament, you're probably doing it wrong. Speed-wise, it's actually pretty reasonable. It's got 29 knots, not quite as good as the Kuma, but it's still pretty good. Turn radius is actually not great, 590 meters, but that's still better than the Kuma at 640. However, we start to see that sluggishness creeping in now at tier 4. It's got by far the worst rudder shift time at 7.2 seconds. Phoenix is next with 6.4, and the Kuma actually has the best rudder response at 5.4, despite having the widest turn circle. So yeah, I think this is the tier where you start to see some of those characteristics that you're going to get in the higher tiers. You've got those short range torpedoes. It starts to feel a bit more sluggish, but it still has that kind of low tier arrangement of just being ringed with guns, basically. And again, as I noted with the tier 3, they feel very lightly armoured, so HE shells do tend to give you gun criticals quite often. And again, there were games where I had multiple guns just completely knocked out. But that isn't really unique to this tier, I don't suppose. Now this match is drawing to a close, and as you can see, again, damage-wise, I'd managed to do fairly reasonably well for myself. It was a tough-ish fight. I mean, we're down to the last couple of ships on each side, but we're really, I mean, we've got an Aslain capping, the Wyoming's up there as well, and it's basically up to me to just defend the cap. There's a St. Louis, or there was a St. Louis pressing down from the north, but he's dead now, and that just kind of leaves this enemy Clemson to take care of. And he's obviously going to be much more focused on trying to squeeze a bit of damage out the Langley, because he must know at this point that we've lost. It also looks like I've got torpedo bombers possibly trying to make a drop on me, and you can see this really quite ineffective AA, just not really doing a lot. It doesn't, like, this is a tier 4 cruiser, so you don't get the benefit of the defensive fire. You do, however, for the first time on the line, get more than just damage control available. You also get hydroacoustic search, which is occasionally quite useful, but it just doesn't quite have the nippiness of something like the Phoenix to... I don't know, it doesn't dance around in the same way, but you've got that spread of guns, so it is still reasonably effective at taking on destroyers, but dodging torpedoes might be a little tougher with that rudder response. But probably, I mean, we're talking, it's only about a second worse than the Phoenix, so we're not talking substantial amounts by any means. So there we go, we just capped them out, and I was actually kind of surprised to see myself at the top of that team. It didn't feel like I'd actually done that much, but no, it was a reasonable result all round, I think. Now, as to, I'm just going to quickly wrap this up by saying, as to the line as a whole, I don't think they're overpowered. I don't think they're going to do what happened with particularly the Soviet destroyers, where we got them to preview and then they substantially changed them. And it was only really one stat. It was the concealment debuff when they fired their guns, because previously they were very good at firing from stealth when we had them in that preview state. And then they actually changed that before they came out live. I don't think that kind of same substantial change will happen with these. On the whole, they do feel like a fairly well-rounded, quite balanced line of cruisers. And I know everyone's going, oh my god, but they're Russian, surely they're OP. I don't actually think they are. I think the tier 3, you might make an argument that is like it's very strong for its tier. The tier 6, I think, is very strong for its tier. But in terms of the other tiers, no, I think they've actually got their own flavour, because they don't have the big guns that the other tiers get. And if anything, I mean, it's tempting to say that they're a line of Clevelands with their smaller guns, and I don't think that's entirely true either, but they more have the flavour of that kind of cruiser than they do of, say, things like the Ioba and the Miyoko and the Pensacola. So, yeah, they're light cruisers in armament, and actually they're light cruisers in terms of armour as well, but that doesn't so much matter at these lower tiers, but it definitely will become relevant once we get a bit higher up. So hopefully you found this first video useful. In the next one I'll be covering tiers 5, 6 and 7. I've got replays for all of those lined up, and it'll be exactly the same format, so yeah, let me know what you think about it. I mean, I did it differently last time I did a line preview, but hopefully this is feeling a bit more streamlined and whatever, and if you've got feedback to the contrary, then I'm more than willing to hear it, because maybe you preferred it the way I did it last time. I don't know. Feedback like that is always useful. So if you found this interesting, informative, you can hit the like button, leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you want already, and as always, stay tuned for more.